Member from Oak Bay, Gordon Head.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and thank you to the member from Surrey White Rock for her line of questioning the Minister for the answers that we've been receiving. Very interesting. And thank you. She thanks me for getting her MLA jurisdiction right this time. I had a number of questions on the standing offer program that BC Hydro has ongoing. If I might just quickly get to, here they are. As the Minister will know, the standing offer program for wind developers at least requires $1 million of investment over 2 years and over 2 years of studying permitting work to be done prior to the project achieving an electricity purchase agreement. The requirement for this upfront investment was done with the explicit intent of reducing program costs for the Crown, and when the BCUC approved the standing offer program, the BCUC stated that developers could expect to be offered an EPA if the project meets all the eligibility requirements and thus be willing to incur the cost to prepare an application. As the Minister will know, the standing offer program was suspended in August 2017 with no warning, despite that Hydro might suggest that its only warning to industry was that there would be changes to price and volume of the SOP projects, not that the criteria itself would change or that the program would be completely redesigned. As the Minister will know, developers that continue to invest in their products accepted that there would be changes to price and volume. Hydro also implied that IPP should have read market signals and there was an oversupply of energy and therefore infer that the standing offer program was a risky investment. However, Honourable Speaker, Chair, the BC Government legislated that the authority must maintain the standing offer program and there was no indication the program would be suspended, cancelled or that there would be a change in the eligibility requirements. There have been some recent public statements by the Minister suggesting that there will be significant changes to the standing offer program and that it will be First Nations focus. So I have a number of questions on this. First, if this suspension leads to a material change to the policy, then is this suspension not actually a cancellation because the new program is a different product?
Minister.
Thank you very much. So I appreciate the member's question is that if this program doesn't come back, isn't this ultimately a cancellation? But I wouldn't be able to say that at this time. Is where it is at, as the member knows, is that it's on hold. And what is going on is a review was first started in 2016, and we've talked about that was attached to the rate revenue application and so on. Industry was informed at the time in 2016 that a review was taking place, that included the SOP, and that, and of course, part of that was, well, does BC Hydro need the power? Does BC, British Columbians, need the power? And so now, review, right? Governments love to do these things. With this government, the new government's review of energy procurement, as mentioned earlier, is part of the review that we just started in March. We're looking at energy procurement, and if the SOP is a good program to continue on with. There's been no decision one way or another at this time.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. The BC government legislated that the authority must maintain the standing offer program, and when BC Hydro proposed the original SOP review, they set precedent for a review period length for prospective SOP participants, thus ensuring important conditions such as price and eligibility would not change suddenly while they were preparing their projects. Why wasn't this put into practice for the recently announced review?
Minister.
Thank you. And I'm sorry if in the conversation I just had with staff, if I've missed and forgotten some of the members' question, I'm sure he'll remind me if I don't get everything that he was hoping to get answers for. So where things are at is that, this government, and I know the member opposite, I know all members of the House as well, want to make sure that rates are fair for British Columbians and for customers of BC Hydro. And whether they're direct customers, they pay a BC Hydro bill, or in my case, Nelson Hydro, we buy power from BC Hydro, and as the City of Nelson does, and passes it on. So for all BC Hydro customers, we want to make sure that rates are fair and affordable. And so part of that issue is ensuring that we're not purchasing power that we're not able to then disperse at the time that power becomes available. So we want to make sure that we have enough power for British Columbians, and recognizing that we are able to sell on the spot market around North America, but then there's the price that you get on the spot market that you also have to consider. And so we want to make sure that we're not putting an undue burden onto the backs of ratepayers by having more power than we're able to disperse at the time at which we need it. I hope that that's making sense. So for example, an IPP comes online next year, but we actually have a surplus of power perhaps next year. And so that would actually impact rates because we're obliged to pay that contract.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Coming back, as I initiated with my questions on this topic, I noted that the SOP program required wind developers to invest $1 million over 2 years of the study permitting. Many wind developers have invested this money. My question to the government then is, how do they see this liability to companies who have made the required investment, sometimes with their own money, and have no program to participate in light of the fact that they were told that the program would exist, that they were required to make this investment, and that they would get an electricity purchase agreement, although the price itself had not been set at that time?
Minister.
Thank you. So ultimately, the impact on companies and the investments that they put in will depend on the outcome of the review. However, there's two things that BC Hydro has to balance in this, and one is obviously impact to ratepayers if we start purchasing power that we're not going to need right now in the immediate future, and the risk that private investors take in the private market. And ultimately, BC Hydro is responsible to ratepayers, not to private investors in the private market.
Member.
Thank you, and I appreciate the answer, but I would suggest that the government is responsible to both. And I would suggest that the rules were put in place for investors, and investors played by those rules, and the rules changed, and now the investors are left with a loss. And I would argue and suggest that government has accepted a potential liability through changing this program, particularly in light of the fact that that argument that the minister just put forward doesn't hold water, because the minister and her government recently approved continuation of the Site C dam to produce power for which there is no demand. So I'm sorry, through you, Honourable Chair, to the Minister, that just the answer is quite unacceptable to me. Nevertheless, let me continue. Was the Minister aware that on March the 14th, 2018, the Federal Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Catherine McKenna, announced the launch of the Low Carbon Economy Challenge? And in particular, is she aware that this, through you, Honourable Chair, that this $500 million initiative will fund projects, and I quote, aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, saving energy and creating green jobs, and that 162 million of that will be available to BC?
Minister?
Thank you. Yes, we are aware of the Low Carbon Economy Challenge and the fund associated with it, and we've actually been able to access it. The fund is going to be able to, it's contributed to other programs, but within this ministry specifically, it's contributed an additional $12 million toward our Building Energy Retrofit Partnership, which will help communities across BC, obviously, reduce carbon emissions associated with the built environment.
Member?
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Again, through you to the Minister, is she aware that the Federal Minister of Environment, Catherine McKenna, chose Vancouver as the location to make the announcement for the programme, and that on that very same day, BC Hydro announced that it would be further diminishing the standing offer programme by suspending those applications already accepted into the programme by BC Hydro, with only a few exceptions? And if so, why did BC Hydro do this?
Minister?
Thank you. Yes, those two announcements were made on that day. It was purely coincidental, however. So there was no purposeful reason why both of them were made that day. It's just how things roll out sometimes.
Member?
Purely coincidental but profoundly ironic, Honourable Chair. Wondering if the Minister is aware that some of the projects were already engaged in the BC Hydro interconnection process.
Minister?
Thank you. The interconnection process is obviously part of the broader process around in the standing offer program, and the reason why it's there is that it looks at the longer-term viability of connecting with that particular project, and so sometimes projects go ahead and sometimes they don't. So that's just the broader for people's information. But yeah, the ministry was aware that there were projects that were in that process at the time of the announcement on March 14th.
Member?
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Just wondering if the Minister could please provide two numbers. The first number is what's the accepted total megawatt capacity of accepted applications in the standing offer program, and the second number is of this total megawatt capacity, how much is within the interconnection queue?
Minister.
Thank you. Sorry about the delay to the member. So what is accepted, what's the megawatt capacity of accepted applications in the SOP? For the standing offer program, it's 137 megawatts. And in the micro standing offer program, there's 2 megawatts. To answer the second part of his question, all of those projects, so therefore all of those megawatts, are at varying stages in studying interconnections. So it's the same number.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. My understanding is 59 megawatts of the 137 are much further along in that process than the 137 itself. With that said, I'm wondering if the Minister could then briefly, in a summary remarks, comment on the status of the following projects. The Nawidi Wind Project in Port Hardy, 14 megawatts. Babcock Ridge Wind Project in Tumbler Ridge, 15 megawatts. Canoe Pass Tidal Project in Campbell River, 2 megawatts. Little Nitnat River Project in Port Alberni, 5 megawatts. The English Creek Hydro Project in Revelstoke, 5.8 megawatts. The Fosthall Creek Power Project in Cusp, 15 megawatts. The Cerrito River Project in Bamfield, 5.3 megawatts. The McKay Creek Project I do apologize to Hansard, who are trying to get this down here, in Revelstoke, 5.2 megawatts. The East Hill Project in my good friend from Kootenay East, Cranbrook Solar Project, 15 megawatts. The Sakunka Wind Project of my good friend here from Peace River South in Chetwynd, 15 megawatts. The McKelvey Creek Hydroelectric Project in Tahsis on Vancouver Island, 5.4 megawatts. Newcastle Creek Hydroelectric Project, Sayward, 4.3 megawatts. Again, coming to the riding of my good friend from Peace River South. The Wartendi Wind Project and the I can't even pronounce it, Zonebeki Wind Project, both of which are 15 megawatts in those. What is the status of these projects that are in the standing, have been approved and are sitting in the standing offering program?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. So all of the projects are on hold with the exception of the Cerrito River Hydropower Project, and they have been sent a draft energy purchase agreement, a draft EPA. The Sakunka Wind Energy Project in Chetwynd is currently pursuing an electricity purchase agreement. They are not, we are. BC Hydro is pursuing an EPA negotiations with the project. That's the same result for the Zonebeki Wind Energy Project, also in Chetwynd. And the last one that is not on hold, but unfortunately has been rejected, is the McKelvey Creek Hydroelectric Project.
Thank
you. Members, can we direct comment?
Yeah.
The chair, please.
Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering if the member would like a written copy of that, if that would be helpful for him.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. That would be very helpful, and I do appreciate the response and the offer. On this topic, then, I'm wondering, Honourable Chair, through you to the Minister, if she's aware that the Rocky Mountain Solar Project in Cranbrook has formed a BC-based research and innovation consortium that includes the UBC Engineering Clean Energy Research Centre, the SFU Chemistry Department, the Natural Resource Council of Canada, Ballard Power, Schneider Electric, Ionomore, Avalon Battery, and others.
Minister.
Thank you. BC Hydro wasn't aware that RMS was forming a BC-based research and innovation consortium. They didn't put that in their application, in their SOP application. That being said, the ministry staff has been able to meet with several of the partners within this consortium and learned about it through those meetings, is my understanding.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Honourable Chair, through you to the Minister, the Rocky Mountain Solar Project, as the Minister will know, is the only solar project that's gone through the Standing Offer Programme. They plan to build a living lab facility site that will focus on advancing next-generation energy solutions in partnership with those organisations that I previously mentioned. As the Minister may know, connectivity to the transmission line is not that difficult in light of the fact that it goes right through the property of the proposed solar facility in the Cranbrook region. I'm wondering, again, I'd like to suggest, Honourable Chair, that Rocky Mountain Solar Project is exactly the type of project that is being looked for under the Low Carbon Economy Challenge that I spoke about earlier, and in particularly the Clean Growth Fund. It demonstrates a commitment to creating diversified clean energy. It ensures that we have reliable power. It promotes research, R&D in the province. It helps establish BC as leaders, and it's being supported by investor capital, not ratepayer supported capital. So my question then is, what is the government doing to attract and retain clean energy sector here in BC, and in particular, whatever happened to the BC NDP, Power BC, Better Plan, Brighter Future program it touted in the lead up to and during the last provincial election campaign?
Minister.
Thank you. Just for the members' information, is that the Rocky Mountain Solar Project is actually not the only approved solar application in the SOP. There's also the Silcoteen Solar Project, which is being advanced under the micro SOP. So smaller, yes, but it is another solar project. And I know the member is very interested in what kind of projects are out there, so I wanted to share that with him. In terms of his question, in terms of what we're doing to attract and retain clean energy sector in BC, as well as the Power BC plan that our party launched while we were in opposition, where is all of that? Well, that's a fair question. And I mentioned it earlier that we were talking about the energy roadmap. We only got a chance to mention it briefly, but that's precisely where we have driven these very issues, is into building our energy roadmap. And that roadmap is about planning for the future. It is about looking at ways in which we can address load and demand. So one of the things that we need to do, and I know the member is very passionate about this and is very, very well versed on this, is obviously reducing carbon emissions. How do we electrify the economy using clean, renewable electricity that is carbon-free? And we already have 98% of the energy we produce in BC meets that test of carbon-free. But if we want to be able to produce more carbon-free energy, then we also need to look at the demand side, the load of what is being demanded by British Columbians. And so we have to look at where are we going into the future, and what kind of demand are we anticipating, and what kind of demand can we grow. So I know the member knows a lot about electric vehicles. He has an electric vehicle, and he really wants to see the transportation shift from fossil fuels to clean electricity. I agree very much with that vision, and so that's part of our energy roadmap and planning out for that. How do we do that? We already have incentive programs. We're already working on expanding charging stations, but what more can we do that to ensure that we're reducing costs for people, which is one of the barriers, as well as making sure we have good solid infrastructure. Dealing with BCUC right now, as I mentioned earlier, is looking into the utilities aspect and who can actually sell power so that we can build out the infrastructure so that it's just as commonplace as what fossil fuel infrastructure has been in the past, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of questions and planning, and that's where that energy roadmap comes into play, and that's where we see that broader vision that we've expressed in the past funneling into. And so, and earlier we were talking about that energy roadmap, then leading into obviously how BC Hydro would be organizing itself and placing itself into that future demand. For example, around electric vehicles, around partnerships with clean energy sector, the private clean energy sector, and so on.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I appreciate the answer, although I'm not sure it directly addressed the question I was raising. I do take issue with the assertion that the Tsilhqot'in program is on par with the Rocky Mountain. Of course, it isn't. I'm quite aware of the micro standing offer program, which is quite different from the larger standing offer program. And in fact, on March the 14th, 2018, BC Hydro issued a statement on that saying electricity purchase agreements for 5 clean energy projects that are part of the impact benefits agreements with BC Hydro and/or are mature projects that have significant First Nations involvement. BC Hydro supports the government's decision to take a closer look at energy procurement to ensure the best value for BC Hydro's customers through their review of BC Hydro this year. As a result, there are no plans at this time to issue any additional electricity purchase agreements. The standing offer and micro-standing offer programs will remain on hold until the review is complete. So the issue I have here, and the issue I continue to raise, is companies have invested millions upon millions of dollars in British Columbia in good faith, directly in response to signals that government sent and BC Hydro sent. And they are now on the hook for this. And this is not because of any uncertainty in the market. It's exclusively because of uncertainty in terms of direction BC Hydro is getting. I'm sure the government is aware, for example, that larger power projects, like in Alberta, have seen prices coming in at 3.7 cents a kilowatt hour for wind. We know that the next call is the Saskatchewan, which is supposed to follow, is likely going to have, if it hasn't come in yet, wind power coming in at 4 cents a kilowatt hour. We know that if there was a call for power at 10 cents, 8 cents, that the industry would meet that. We know that firm wind power can be delivered at around that price, and it's being done around the world. So my question to the minister is this: why hasn't she instructed BC Hydro to explore cheaper alternatives to Site C, cheaper alternatives that could include firm power calls that link wind with storage?
Minister of Energy, Mines and Petroleum Resources.
Thank you. The member's question was specifically, why didn't I direct BC Hydro to look at alternatives, specifically wind with firm storage? And he's right to say that I didn't direct because they were already doing it. They did do that, and they put it as part of their submission to the BC Utilities Commission, I believe originally back in 2014, was it? 2014? Your original submission to BC Hydro? Oh, pardon me, sorry. Back in their original submission to, I believe, government in 2014, pardon me if I'm not getting that correct, but definitely their submission to the BC Utilities Commission in their review of Site C that we put forward the last fall.